Hello there, my name's Gary Sims from Android Authority. Today we're going to be looking at the OPPO F1 Plus. Now the phone comes with a 16 megapixel front-facing camera. That's right, a front-facing camera is 16 megapixels. It's got 4 gigabytes of RAM. It's got 64 gigabytes of onboard storage. It's got a fingerprint reader. It's got VUOC fast charging. It's got calling Gorilla Glass 4. It's got a really good set of individual features. And the question we're going to ask ourselves is, has OPPO managed to put this together to give us a good smartphone experience? Well, let's find out. So when it comes to design, really the first thing we have to talk about is the similarities between this phone and the phones by a certain Californian company that use a fruity logo. Now, for some of you doesn't really matter, you just don't care. For some of you, it's a real plus, you like the design, it's really not an issue to you. And for some of you, it will actually be quite a negative thing. It comes down to everybody's personal preference. But once we go beyond the design language, I must say that this phone is really a pleasure to hold. It's got a great 6.6mm body that's really quite thin, and it's got a good design to it, it's got a good feel to it. Everybody that I've handed this to say, hey, what do you think about this phone? They've been impressed by the way it feels in the hand. Of course, you as the consumer, it's your choice whether you want a phone that looks like this or not. Now, looking around the phone, on the front we have the 5.5-inch Full HD display, and then the home button, the physical home button, which has a built-in fingerprint reader at the bottom. Going around the edges, you have the volume rocker on the left-hand side and the power button on the right-hand side, which is just below the SIM tray. At the top, there's very little except for a small hole for a microphone, whereas at the bottom, things are quite busy. You have the speaker grill, you have the micro USB port, you have another microphone hole, and you have the 3.5mm headphone jack. Now on the back of the phone, you have the OPPO logo and of course the 13 megapixel camera. The OPPO F1 Plus comes with a high quality 5.5-inch Full HD IPS LCD display along with Corning Gorilla Glass 4. The display is bright and works well indoors and outdoors. With a resolution of 1920 by 1080, that 5.5-inch display gives you a pixel density of 400 ppi, which for a phone in the premium mid-range segment is more than sufficient. The viewing angles are good and the bezels are amazing. At just 1.6mm thick, the significant lack of bezels gives the display that edge-to-edge feel without incurring the additional cost of maybe a curved screen. One of the interesting features of ColorOS 3.0 on the F1 Plus is this eye protection display settings. According to OPPO, there is research which shows that shortwave blue light can actually be harmful to the eye. Therefore, they have a setting which is able to filter out this blue light and give the display a less jarring, more smoothing experience. Whether that's marketing or science, I don't know, but I like their thinking. Now turning our attention to the hardware, the F1 Plus boasts 4 gigabytes of RAM, a fingerprint reader and quick charging. The only slight letdown in my opinion is the choice of processor. The F1 Plus uses a MediaTek Helio P10, which is an octa-core processor with 8 Cortex A53 cores. 4 cores are clocked at 1.2 GHz and the other 4 cores are clocked at 2 GHz. Accompanying the CPU is the ARM Mali T860 GPU. In this particular one has 2 cores. In terms of everyday use, these specs are more than adequate and most users won't find themselves wishing for a different CPU. And because of that nice 4 gigabytes of RAM, even some die-hard power users among you will find the F1 Plus more than sufficient. However, if you play a lot of 3D games, go to lots of complex websites or use CPU-intensive apps, then you may find that the Helio P10 isn't quite up to your needs. The use of a Cortex A53 octa-core processor is also reflected in the benchmarks. The OPPO F1 Plus scored 876 on Geekbench's single-core tests and 3,311 for its multi-core tests. Now, for some context, these scores are lower than the octa-core A53 Kirin 935 found in the Mate S, lower than the octa-core A53 Helio X10 that's found in the Redmi Note 2, and also the single core test is actually lower than the 32-bit Snapdragon 801. As for Antutu, the F1 Plus scored 51,158, and for Epic Citadel, the device managed 42.4 frames per second on the ultra high quality mode. If you set the quality down to just high quality, then the device does score a very reasonable 59.4 frames per second. So while the CPU seems to be a little lacking, it's towards the low end of the performance spectrum, it does seem that MediaTek have made some good choices in the GPU department. The fingerprint reader on the F1 Plus is very good. It's fast, accurate, and is certainly comparable with the lightning fast and reliable fingerprint scanner on the Huawei Mate 8. However, unlike the Mate 8, which has its fingerprint reader on the back, you can't wake and unlock your phone just by putting your finger on the reader. Instead, you need to press the home button with your finger, which will then wake the phone, and at the same time, it will unlock it. Now, that's maybe a minor difference, but my personal opinion is that it's better to have the fingerprint reader in a separate place rather than on the home button. If it's any consolation to you, the Samsung Galaxy S range and the Samsung Galaxy Note range suffer from the same problem. But that's just my humble opinion. The F1 Plus features a single speaker on the bottom edge next to the micro USB port. The speaker is quite loud and the sound is reasonable considering it isn't a front-facing speaker. As with many devices, music can sound a bit thin with a lack of bass. The F1 Plus has a 2,850 mAh battery, which is amazing when you consider the 6.6mm thickness of this phone. Now that battery is more than sufficient to give you full day battery life without any problems whatsoever. I did some battery tests. First I ran Epic Citadel to test the battery life while playing 3D games. According to my calculations, you'll be able to play around 4.5 hours of 3D games on one charge. Now 4.5 hours of 3D game playing is quite an impressive number, as there are phones out there which don't even give you 4.5 hours of on-screen time when you don't even go near 3D. So this really is a good sign. As for simpler tasks like browsing the web, you'll get at least 8 hours from a full charge, or alternatively you could watch 8 hours of YouTube video if you stream it over Wi-Fi. I did a call test where I called another phone for 30 minutes and I monitored the battery life, and my estimation is that the F1 Plus will give you at least 20 hours of 3G talk time. Now when it comes to charging that 2,850 mAh battery, the OPPO F1 Plus comes with a VOOC charging system, and it really is quite fast. You can go from 0 to 75% in just 35 minutes. And according to my testing, it takes just under 1 hour and 10 minutes to go from 0 to 100%. If you're looking for a stock Android experience, then the OPPO F1 Plus is not for you, because it comes with ColorOS 3.0, which is OPPO's heavily skinned version of Android 5.1. For example, there is no app drawer and you have to put all your apps in folders on the home screen. Much of the colouring and the UI has also been changed, however Android users will find it familiar. Having said that, you do get access to all of Google's services, including Google Play and Gmail and YouTube, so everything you'd expect to find on a standard Android phone is found here. ColorOS also adds lots of extra features, including a one-handed mode and support for gestures. There's also support for the fingerprint reader, there's a quiet time mode which will mute your device automatically according to the times you set. There's support for OCloud, that's OPPO's cloud service for backing up your contacts and SMS messages, and there's even a security center which includes a virus scanner and various privacy settings. Now the rear camera on the F1 Plus has a 13 megapixel sensor along with an f2.2 lens and autofocus. Overall, I've been very impressed by the camera. I've used it for close-ups, selfies and casual snaps both indoors and outdoors, and the camera really hasn't put a foot wrong. Of course, the caveat to that statement is that it's a smartphone camera and not a DSLR, and no matter how good the camera is, it can't capture light that isn't there. I was particularly impressed by the indoor photos. Of course, if you push the lighting scenario to the extremes, you will get lots of noise in the photos. In terms of the camera app, you get a simple camera interface by default. However, you can swipe your way into different shooting modes, including time-lapse, video, beauty, and panorama. You can also tap on an icon to reveal functions like Ultra HD, filters, GIF animation, double exposure, and expert mode. The latter allows you to control the ISO, the shutter speed, and the white balance. However, it also lets you configure the camera to save a RAW version of every shot taken, and that will be saved in the digital negative format. Plus, of course, you can manually focus your shots. My biggest complaint with the camera app is it doesn't rotate all the UI elements when you go from portrait to landscape. Although some elements do move, many of them remain in portrait mode, which is really quite annoying. The OPPO F1 Plus is very unusual in the fact that its front-facing camera actually has a greater megapixel count than its rear-facing camera. The front-facing camera has a 16 megapixel sensor along with an f2.0 lens. The software for the front-facing camera has also been upgraded and tweaked. There is a new Beautify 4.0 mode for smoothing out those wrinkles and covering up those blemishes. Plus there is support for the new selfie panorama mode, which is designed for group shots. And so there you have it, the OPPO F1 Plus. It's got this sleek 6.6mm body, thin bezels, Corning Gorilla Glass 4, you've got that selfie camera at the front, 16 megapixels, you've got the fingerprint reader built into the home button, you've got VOOC fast charging, you've got 4GB of RAM, 64GB of internal storage. In fact, it's actually got dual SIM support, and one of the SIM slots can be replaced by a micro SD card so that you can expand the storage by another 128GB. Now there are three things that you might not like about this phone. One is the design language. Does it look too similar to the iPhone? The other is the ColorOS operating system. If you're used to using stock Android, then maybe you won't like ColorOS. And lastly, there is the processor. Really, I was looking for something with a bit better performance, especially when you consider all the extra features like 4GB of RAM, 64GB of storage that are built into this phone. However, because of the price point, maybe those weaknesses can be overlooked. The OPPO F1 Plus is available for just €389 in Europe and £299 in the UK. Well, my name's Gary Sims from Android Authority, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Android Authority's YouTube channel. Please use the comments below to tell me what you think about the OPPO F1 Plus. And also, don't forget to stay tuned to AndroidAuthority.com because we are your source for all things Android.